Thank you for being here today. I'm happy to introduce both Bradley and Shawana. And Bradley, I'm going to let you do the introductions and take it from here. And if you have any questions, please post them in the chat, and we're happy to facilitate those. And we want this to be more conversational and, focused on your thoughts and questions and conversation driven. So please feel free to post questions.
Thank you so much, Doug. And thank you to Dr. Shawana P. Johnson, GISP, for being here. I'm really looking forward to talking with you about your career and how you've developed your business and what that means for sustainability and global supply chains. So just to start off, so tell us how you're associated with Case Western Reserve University.
So my doctorate of management degree was conferred in 1998 from Case Western Reserve University. It was a flagship program for people that worked full-time and was meant to be what we call an applied PhD. So people that were not interested in becoming professors, but had a lot of rigorous engineering and/or heavy corporate background and needed that extra little bit of understanding of how to do advanced research in a very rigorous way, and yet take it and apply it to the business world in a relevant way. And so I graduated from that very first program. That program at Case launched 50 other university doctorate of management degrees for applied PhDs, believe it or not. Scott Cowan headed it up at the time. And then it just kind of, once the program was so fruitful at Case, it's just been replicated all around the world, actually.
That's incredible. So tell us more about, the beginning of your career and how education kind of played a part in that for you to ultimately end up at Case's PhD program.
So my bachelor's degree is Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration with a focus on marketing. My master's degree was in Management and Labor Relations. And it was after my master's degree, I started off working in high performance computing, long before people knew what that term actually meant. So my very first job out of college was selling and marketing and understanding the technical sales aspect of high performance computing. I wanted to go to work for General Electric, but you had to have a master's degree. So I worked full time at a company called NCR in their computer department while I finished my master's. And then I got picked up by General Electric Information Services Corporation, where I worked with major corporations who were installing and adding massive technology programs to underpin their entire organization. So engineering programs for project management, accounts payable, receivable, general ledgers, everything on the business side. And that's, from there, I worked with a lot of people at General Electric. I got promoted. I had fabulous bosses, and I got promoted up the chain. And one of my bosses went to a division called GE Aerospace. So General Electric Aerospace. He called me up one day and he said, hey, do you still want to do international kind of like engineering, consulting, and sales work? I said, yeah, I'm living in New York City. I'm getting ready to go take over a division of Europe, and I'm on my way. He says, well, I have an opportunity for you. You'll be able to take over the whole world. And if you come and interview for this job, you'd have global responsibility. And I said, oh, yeah, what's it for? And he said, satellite technology. And I said, I don't even know if it has one T or two T's or one L or two L's. And I think you have the wrong person. He said, no, you have high performance computing background. You understand engineering services from a systems engineering perspective, and you know marketing. So I went to Washington, D.C., where the division was, and I went to part of the government offices. This was coming out of the government and it was moving into the commercial world. So I was actually in a classified facility with the government. I didn't even know what that was at the time. Red lights are spinning and people are escorting me around. And I went into a room where I saw my very first set of satellite images. So this is Earth observation satellite technology. And I saw Mount Fuji, it was exploding, the volcano had erupted and the satellite caught it. There were fires burning in Yellowstone. There was, the Aral Sea was drying up and you could actually see the dry salt beds all around it. And I was completely taken by the ability to see the globe, so up close and personal, and thought about what you could do with that. And as I'm walking around the room, they asked me, well, how would you sell this kind of data? And I said, well, how do you get it back down to Earth? And they said, well, it comes to a satellite ground station, and then it goes over to a processing center. I got the processing center and the computer part. And then you have a special software and you can use it for a variety of environmental and planetary purposes, land use, land change. And I said, well, what I do is I go to where those ground stations are because they have to have a lot of technical people there. And I bet there's some business people there too. And I'd see if there were any small businesses around that actually took the data and used it for something of value in the rest of the world. And then how many of these ground stations are there? And he said, well, there's 8 commercial ones. We need a lot more. I said, well, I'd start standing up more of those ground stations. And then I said, and where are the schools? Where are the schools at that know how to teach people how to do this? And he said, well, we have to start. That's part of your job. I said, so my job is to do the business and educate the world. And sure enough, the company was formed by a law. It was called the Land Remote Sensing Act. And it was a law that Congress put into place that said this technology is so good and so valuable that we created in the United States, we should share it with the rest of the world. And they created a law, and 2 companies bid on a contract to make sure it began to happen. So I said, well, I'd find the universities with great engineering programs, great space engineering programs, great geography programs, land and studies of the surface of the earth. And I'd give them free data, a free training curriculum, and I'd find the people that have the software to look at it with, and I'd package it all together and give it away for free. And that guy left the room, and the gentleman that I knew that had asked me to come and interview for the position said, hey, this is great. When can you start? I said, well, when am I going to have the interview? And he said, well, it just happened. So that's how I got the job. And that's how it all started.
Wow, that's incredible. Just as a reminder to our participants, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out in the chat. Let us know. We'd be glad to take them. So with that and your time at GE Aerospace, you mentioned these people that you knew that really set you up for success. How important were mentors on your career path to get you where you are?
They were everything. So for those of you that are seniors or those of you that are getting near to that place, the person you report to is extremely important. And the reason is they are the ones that can expose you to new opportunities. And they're also the ones that praise you for a job well done and tell their bosses about you. So when you have a great manager, they open the doors for your success. And my best bosses and managers ever are still really good friends of mine, Tom Carlson and Dr. Stephen Cox. They were people that when they were asked, when they were sitting with boards of directors or other partners of the corporation, and they'd say, that's a great program, who did that? They'd have me sitting outside waiting, and they'd say, well, let me introduce you to the person that actually did that program. So they didn't take credit for themselves, although they could take credit because they managed my input, they helped orchestrate the strategic plans, but they always promoted my capabilities. And you could have a boss that says okay things about you, but it's a very different situation when that person has you sitting outside waiting to actually enter a meeting and tell them how you put a program in place or how you developed it or how you did your research or your analytical work. Because there's an enormous amount of advanced analytics and market analytics that go into that industry as well. And into any industry, you've got to understand the engineering side and the marketing and analytics side as well. But bosses change the world for you. That management structure and the way they allow you to interact with other people, it matures your own ability to communicate, and it gives you confidence. So even when you're kind of afraid to go try something, if you know they have your back, you're more willing to be a little bit braver or experiment or do something a little out of the box.
Of course. So you mentioned NCR and GE Information Systems and then GE Aerospace. What was it like working for large companies instead of the government or smaller companies? What were the benefits and what were the drawbacks of that?
So I loved working for large companies. I'm a people person. So the more people, the better, and the more avenues of exposure and the type of people I can interact with, the better. So for me, the big part was not bad, right up until you have to have a document signed off on or a quick decision made. Quick decisions, you've really got to understand the bureaucracy of the organization you work in. So when people tell you you don't have to have, if anybody at school tells you you don't have to have people skills, you absolutely have to have people skills, or at least fake it, because you've got to understand how to manage things and walk them through, especially in a large corporation. And GE Aerospace was bought and sold 7 times while I was there, and merged with other companies. So I actually worked in what was called a quasi-governmental commercial firm. GE Aerospace won this contract with the government. They were part of Hughes Aircraft, the Hughes Aircraft, the guy out in California. And they they had a joint venture, and the company was called the Earth Observation Satellite Company. And I kept my GE affiliation. So my paycheck said GE and my benefits were all General Electric, but I was really part of this joint venture company. And then over a period of 10 years, we were bought and sold 7 times. I had 7 different badges. So I went from being GE Aerospace to Martin Marietta to Lockheed Martin. Hughes Aircraft was sold to General Motors. So General Motors owned us at one point in time. General Motors then sold the division to Raytheon. Raytheon eventually gave it back to Hughes Aircraft, and then Lockheed Martin took over the whole thing, and they called the company Space Imaging. So in a period of 10 years, you never know what's going to happen when you're at a major corporation. Now, the government oversaw the whole program because, remember, I said this was a technology that was created by the government, and they decided to allow it to go commercial. And so they had oversight to make sure that the technology moved into the commercial world appropriately. And that's a lot of work. I mean, we had more engineers in the space industry. You're always engineer heavy, then advanced analytics, and then sales and marketing is usually a lesser number of people, because it's the engineers that understand how the systems work together. They're the ones who also, whether they're mechanical engineers, structural, civil, they keep the wheels on the bus, so to speak. So it's not unusual that I'd be sitting in a meeting with a double E and a PhD in astrophysics on the other side of me. That's how I ended up getting a PhD, because I worked with enormous amounts of doctors and advanced degreed individuals. And one guy that I worked with at NASA, he told me, I think you're really smart and you're really cute, and we all believe everything you say, but nobody's ever going to listen to you really, because you don't have a PhD. and I think at the time he told me this, he's not in this world any longer, but God bless him. He gave me great advice because he told the truth. He said, people like you, they think you're smart. You don't come in with the credentials that they want to see. And it was basically rigor. They wanted to know that I understood the rigor involved in an advanced degree, and I had workflow capability, so that I was clear I understood engineering processes, but I hadn't gone through an advanced degree program like a PhD, where I really applied rigorous research methodology to everything I did. So they all, my mentors were not only my bosses, but they were also my clients and other people in the industry. I'm a big on people mentoring each other and taking help wherever you can get it and being open to that. And big corporation and government is no different than a little corporation. You have to find people to work closely with. You have to be able to trust them and they you, and listen to each other, and trust that you have each other's best interest at heart. And so whether I was at a government division or I was working inside of the big corporation, it was really about big companies, small relationships. Keep those relationships intact.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really beautiful idea, and one that kind of falls to the wayside when a lot of people think about the idea of big companies or working for the government. But being responsible and in tune with those people that surround you and are those mentors is so key to your career growth. So you mentioned this rigor that the PhD proved that you had. You found that rigor at Case Western. How did your career change after the PhD program?
So it actually changed during it, but just at the last year. And it's interesting, on the very first day of the program, when there's a lot more people than there are at the end, needless to say, they said, kind of look to your left, look to your right. One or both of the people you just looked at won't be here on the day you're hooded. And that was absolutely true. And they really helped us understand that we were all going to go through some kind of change. Because when you enter a program where you do that much, first of all, that much reading and writing and research, your personal life changes for sure. But it changes the way you think. You ask better questions. You listen to people's answers with a different listening ear. I think you're much more perceptive as to what good quality data and information consists of. So it changes you. And during the program, and I thought for sure of all the people in the program, I was single, I traveled a lot for my career, other people were married, had kids. I thought, well, my life will change the least of anybody in this program. And lo and behold, in the second to the last year, so just before the graduation year, we had undergone one of our many mergers and acquisitions, and Lockheed Martin had decided they were not going to stay in the commercial satellite business, and they were only going to build big satellites for the government. And we're talking, they built big, what we call national overhead architecture, national technical means. satellites. And our satellite was a pretty sophisticated imaging satellite. Everyone today knows it as Landsat. And Landsat was about a $380 million to $500 million sensor, all in to build and launch the satellite. But they were going to focus on billion-dollar satellites only. And I was talking to my bosses, and one of them was serving part-time with the National Reconnaissance Office, and another one was actually from Raytheon, who came through Lockheed Martin. And I said, well, I think this is the wrong approach. I think small satellites are here to stay in the commercial world. And the next big thing is going to be, we're entering an age where the compute is smaller, the compute times are faster, the cost of compute is cheaper, and distributed analytics and multi-cloud disciplines are coming. And when that happens, small satellites, and I mean $5 million satellites or $10,000 satellite, will be the norm, because all of our engineering was moving to microprocessors. Everything was getting smaller. And they looked at me and they said, yeah, we think that's absolutely true. So I went back to my doctorate cohort, and we all talked about our respective industries, and I told them what had happened. And I said, I want to write a white paper and talk about this industry and why they should invest in the industry and stay in it. And actually, a lot of people in that program helped me, because we had a lot of CEOs in the program and people that were very well respected in the industry, a lot of industries. And so I wrote the white paper, turned it in. 2 weeks later, I got a five-figure bonus in my paycheck out of the blue. And I'm like, wow, somebody made a mistake. And I went to HR and I said, I got an extra lot of money, and I think you guys made a mistake. And they said, oh, that's not a mistake. Your bosses gave you that for some kind of paper you wrote. So I go trucking into the CEO's and head of the board's office, and I said, hey, thanks for the bonus. So you've changed your minds. And they went, oh, no, we haven't changed our mind, but that was a really good paper. Thus the joy of working for a big company sometimes. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, we don't want you to leave. We want you to stay. I said, well, what am I going to do if I stay here? I spent the last 10 years building this commercial industry. And they said, well, we're not going to go into that. We're not going to stay in that part of the small satellite business. So I went back to my PhD cohort and I said, hey, they love my paper. They're not going to do it. Well, they helped me write a strategic business plan for the first networked organization. It's called a matrix networked organization, where I use subject matter experts from all over the world to build the company and to provide market research and engineering services to all these companies all over the world that I knew were already involved in commercial satellite technology. So I went back to my bosses, I showed them the plan, and they said, wow, this is a great plan. And I said, still nothing. And they went, nope, Lockheed Martin is going to do this other thing, and that's it. And I said, well, I'm going to leave and I'm going to start this company. And they said, how can we help you get started? I said, it would be really great if I could take the database that I created for the past 10 years of contacts all over the world, if I could take it and work with it, and you'd allow me to have that. And they did better than that. They said, well, we can do better than that. And they sold me everything I needed to start the company in a technology transfer for $1.
Wow.
And so Global Marketing Insights was started with all the I still have paper clips that were purchased by them, because they said, we're not going to take the time to come close up your offices and ship that stuff back. We'd actually just give it away or tell somebody to get rid of it. It costs more to send it back than it did for me to have it. But the goal was the database. So that had 2,500 to 3,000 contacts in it globally. And today that database, so for our marketing analytics person, advanced analytics person that's on the phone. I think that was Katie. Katie, that database is now 1.7 million contacts around the globe in the commercial satellite industry. So you take care of your databases, you grow them, you exercise them, but that's how the company was started, through a technology transfer from, again, really good bosses who knew that the big company they worked for wasn't going to change, but they agreed with me. They agreed this big commercial thing was going to take off, but they helped me continue on my path. And the gentleman that actually signed everything over is still one of my very best friends. He eventually became the director of the National Reconnaissance Office, and his name is the Honorable Jeffrey Harris. And another gentleman on the board of directors, his name was Jim Clapper. He became General James Clapper, and he was the head of the department, the Director of National Intelligence for the United States.
Wow, that is actually astonishing.
It was to me too. So.
The growth that you've seen in, I guess, 22 years is incredible. You have to, I mean, I personally have to stop and wonder, does Lockheed feel like they made a mistake? Are they like happy that you took it and ran with it?
Yeah, no, they're still, they're just now getting into the small sat business. So, and I didn't build satellites, that was their business. I helped people stay on the right business plan that were getting into the business. So be very clear, I didn't go into competition with them. I helped people that were using smaller, faster microprocessing chips, using better material. I work with a lot of material science, physical science engineers, fluid dynamics engineers, because things were improving and becoming so much more cost effective that these small satellites could be built and utilized for a lot of different commercial purposes. And that's what we call the geospatial intelligence side of the equation.
Right. I think that's the perfect segue to get into Global Marketing Insights, your geospatial company. So can you tell us a little bit more about GMI's business model and what exactly it is that your company does?
Sure. So one of the things that I found immediately when I got out into the science world is scientists and engineers love their science and their engineer capabilities. They hate the business side of the equation. So our goal is always to help merge their capabilities with the business world. So we do three things only in commercial geospatial capabilities, though. We never step outside of the space and geospatial technology component of what we do. And we're highly focused on sustainability and supply chain. So when you think of what in the world creates big problems, well, global food insecurity, water insecurity, and energy insecurity. So that's where we live, and we provide three things to companies that are developing geospatial technologies or want to work with those companies. We do strategic planning, but it's a live, real-time, 2.5-day process, and then we live with them for a year, almost sometimes 2 years, especially if they're a small business. And we help them stand up their business, define their markets, go after their clients, help them get funding, additional funding, and help them actually find the right people to put in the right places in their companies. Second thing we do are just sometimes marketing and sales services, but again, only for the geospatial industry. And the third thing is market research. So you can do a lot of different areas of science focus when you use Earth observation satellite technology. So you really have to decide and research what part of the market and the world do you want to work in, define your targeted client base so you know what your total addressable market is so you can go after it. So a lot of highly advanced analytics and market research analytics. You have to understand the engineering side of the market, the compute side of the market, and then the distribution side of the market as well. And you've got to know, where's that technology, where's it going to reside in the commercial world? Is it food insecurity? Is it sustainability, deforestation, climate change? So we focus on 3 business products on a very highly scientific mission for a very scientific industry.
You mentioned your increase of contacts that you had from originally starting at Lockheed Martin. Are your customers, do they usually use your service just once and then they go off and become successful businesses that use satellite technology? Or do you have a pretty strong customer base that returns to your services repeatedly?
Yeah, so I would say both. And sometimes we might not hear from people. We run into people over and over again because we used to travel 80% of the time. So we'd see people all over the world a lot. And then maybe we'd see them every year, but we wouldn't do business with them again for 5 years. Or some stay sustainable customers all the time. And they go on a subscription service for market research, so to speak. So it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, I guess that's really interesting how when you're talking about geospatial technologies and information, large-scale projects usually take a lot of time to, I guess, gather these insights and be able to put them in a communicable and useful format. What does the average kind of length of a project look like for GMI?
Most of the time, it's there's 2 kinds. They're the strategic planning, where we stay with them for 1 year to 2 years at a time. And then there's the market research. Most of the market research is a 2-month period, 3-month period, because it's highly customized. It's not just, it's using that database and saying, not only you can make $500 million by year 3, here are the companies, these are the names of the people you need to target, here's the kind of things you need to talk to them about. It's highly targeted. But it's like anything else, what we tell clients in the supply chain management companies. So think of your big industrial supply chain companies, Cargill, the Koch brothers, a Swiss Re Bank, they're a Bunge, Archer Daniel Midland, lots of these big companies, everyone in the oil and gas industry, Royal Dutch Shell, Exxon Mobil. These organizations have big supply chains. They usually want their market research in a very short period of time. So it's like anything else. I say, well, if you want this in a month, it would normally we deliver in 3 months. We'll just put more people on it and more time. So you increase the labor in a shorter amount of time and you produce the product faster. And our researchers are all over the world, and they all have a very specific set of subject matter expertise. And that's who we draw on to complete research projects. But those big supply chain companies may want something in 10 days. They're also willing to pay 10 times the price for that.
Yeah, with that sort of time frame analysis, COVID-19 is obviously like a hot topic for everybody right now. Was there a higher demand for information once COVID-19 hit for these global supply chain companies?
Yes, absolutely. One of our clients is called Descartes Labs, named after the mathematician Descartes and philosopher, actually. So Descartes Labs, they were a spinoff this company was a spinoff out of Los Alamos National Laboratories in New Mexico. They are known for their highly advanced compute capability for satellite imagery, all in the cloud. Wow. They do not own one hardware piece in their entire company. They built everything on virtual parallel processing cores in the cloud. Like they spun 50,000 cores up. They run the entire globe. They have a living planet with a lot of different satellite capabilities on it globally, and multiple kinds of satellite data, synthetic aperture radar versus multispectral Earth observation data. And because they have the globe always updated, they took mobility index data that showed how, and this is anonymized data. This is not the kind of cell phone data where I could track your cell phone and see you pinging and moving. This is what's called regional anonymized data. And that's the only kind you can really utilize because of Privacy Information Act. But you can look at that data and you could see all of a sudden there aren't as many cell phones in Manhattan. And where are the cell phone signals now coalescing? So they did a county by county mobility index that they laid on top of the geospatial data, and every state, every county, people were standing up special contract offices and they were featured above the fold on the top half. So for my marketing person, I think that's you again, Katie, for above the fold in the Wall Street Journal, they got the top of the fold in the Wall Street Journal about their mobility index. You can't imagine what happened after that. So their phones and their LinkedIn and email went berserk, and people wanted that data with their global capability. So everyone in supply chain, they wanted to know not what was happening in Nebraska where the corn was moving to a grain silo. They wanted to know what is happening to the trucks or my ships outside of Italy. What's happening on the Rhine River, the biggest port where these cargo ships go in and offload grain and food products to the rest of the world. So mobility indexing, because of COVID-19, shipping, maritime information, logistics information, coupled with geospatial data, so you know where things are, it has gone through the roof because of COVID-19, and the need was immediate. And there weren't many companies poised to do that already had that great underpinning of data. So that's just one example, and I could give you hundreds of them, but it's very pertinent to the situation we're in, because not only were people worried about delivering product that was already in their supply chain, they're concerned about how am I going to get my new inputs to my product and keep on moving forward, because they're in countries that I can't access now. There are so many barriers to restriction to travel. It changed everything in the supply chain process.
Yeah, I think that the image that you're describing from Descartes and Los Alamos is really helpful for some of our audience members if they don't know geospatial technology or really even how to fathom it, because you're operating at such a big scale with complex numbers and data. COVID-19 aside, how does Global Marketing Insights use that data for sustainability purposes?
So we focus mostly in sustainability on deforestation and climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. So because sustainability could be a lot of things. So geospatial satellite technology works best to observe illegal deforestation, where organizations and parties are going in, cutting down forests to plant maybe palm trees, because palm oil is a lot higher value in the world than maybe that forest is. Same in the Brazilian rainforest. I've been tracking the Brazilian rainforest my entire career because at one point in time, people wanted to log material out of there and they were selling it to anybody that needed paper and wood pulp. So think of IKEA. IKEA is one of the largest buyers of wood and paper pulp products. So for sustainability, people want to know, companies want to know, organizations want to be part of a sustainable, highly certified process. And the only way you can know that people aren't illegally deforesting something is to track and to monitor that forest. And you can easily do that with satellite data because you can see actually acreage where things have hectares that have been cut down. And then you can match that to data you find on the ground to find out if that was done legally or illegally. Greenhouse gas emissions, we're just now getting satellites, small satellites, that are able to read methane and CO2 and CO4 emissions off of the surface of the earth directly. I'd say about the size of football field, 2 football fields, an average landfill size. You can now use a satellite out of Canada that can actually give you particles per billion readout on those emissions. We've been able to do greenhouse gas emissions, but using airborne sensors or drones. And that data is very difficult to work with, and it's very expensive. So we're just now seeing satellites other than the big European and NASA satellites that looked at columns of air. You'll see on your weather channel, you can look at your climate change model, but that's looking at the ozone layer. And it's looking at particulates per billion in the ozone. I'm talking now about sensors that can actually see right down to a landfill or an oil and gas field and tell you where fracking is going on and where maybe methane is leaking. So sustainability and geospatial technologies tied very closely together, because also now we have good, better, maybe not the best yet, but we have better government regulation. So we actually now have some substance to telling a company, you need to monitor this, because if you don't, you could face a fine. And also in Europe, they have carbon credit trading system. So you not only want to make sure the products you have come from sustainable resource areas, but you also want to make sure you're doing your part as a big company, managing your own carbon footprint. And there are a lot of ways to do that statistically with real numbers behind it, with satellite, airborne, and terrestrial geospatial sensors.
Yeah, I think that's just incredible, especially where we're at right now, being able to have timely, accurate, and specific data to kind of hold corporations or companies, whether accountable or just for their own use, to know where they're headed or where they've been. We've actually we've got a couple of questions from the chat. One from Bob Sopko, who asks, "Are you able to count herds of cattle, or is it too far away?"
So there's actually a gentleman in Toledo, Ohio, believe it or not. He was a professor out of Bowling Green University. He created a sensor that actually measured keratin. And does anybody know what keratin is? It's hair. So we use that sensor can look at, take a heavy keratin signal, and then you have to match it though with a lot of other sensor data. So the long answer to your question is you could eventually get there with high resolution imagery. That's very expensive. It comes from companies like Maxar Digital Globe. Airbus out of Europe has a very, those sensors, that data is very expensive. So you'd have to match multiple types of satellite imagery and sensor data, but you could eventually track herds. Now, you have to be in the right part of the world to do that as well. So you've got to be able to see them as they move. There are algorithms now that track movement, and we know how to track movement. But years ago, we were tracking livestock and elephants across the Sahel in Africa. So we could do that 30 years ago. But remember, that's a great big open area. We didn't have to worry about them scurrying in and out of forested lands. And they left a track in the sand that was really what we were monitoring. The resolution wasn't good enough to see them, but now you can find indicators, and you use those indicators to get you to a point that then you use better resolution data to see what it is you want to see. Certain parts of the world, tracking livestock wouldn't be so easy because the land would not be conducive to you seeing them. And radar imagery, even though it can see through trees and see through cloud cover and tree canopy, still wouldn't give you the kind of target reflection. But in some places, it's possible.
Awesome. We have another question from Sammy Maynard. She asks, what was your experience as a woman in a technology industry, and how did you navigate any difficulties?
So, funny story. I went to my very first really big remote sensing meeting. It was called the American Society of Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing, ASPRS. I mean, who names an organization the American Society of Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing? And it took me a couple of years to learn how to say it, actually. So I went to my first meeting, and now I'm the president of the Eastern Great Lakes region of that American Society of Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing. I went to my very first meeting. There were 5,000 men. The meeting was in, I think it was in Texas. And there I saw 3 other women in the room. The one was a person that was my mentor, and her name was Dr. Tina Carey. She eventually became the president of that organization. But so for me, remember I told you I'm a people person, I loved it. And I had come out of the computer industry. And most women that I went to college with went into sales. They went to Kraft Foods, they went to Xerox. Some of them went to IBM, but not too many. I was one of the few that jumped into computer technology with my whole body and soul and spirit. So I was always navigating in an environment of a lot of men. And to me, it was normal. I mean, in my programs at college, there weren't very many women. And I started hiring a lot of women. When I took over worldwide sales at that division of GE Aerospace, I hired the best people for the job. So I caution you, forget everything, get the best person for the job who's gonna make the company succeed. Because if the company doesn't succeed, your career doesn't move forward, and that pretty little thing every couple of weeks that comes called the paycheck might not come. So you pick the best people for the job. But I hired a lot of women. And then over time, I'll tell you the honest truth, a lot of women opted out of their careers. They didn't leave because they were treated badly or they were mistreated. They got married, they decided to have families, and they made another life decision. I was in the side of the business. We traveled. We had worldwide territories. There was no Zoom. And truthfully, up until March, I was still traveling 50 to 80% of the time. I can tell you honestly, if I've ever been discriminated against, I didn't know it. So maybe ignorance is bliss, but I've had great bosses, men. I've never had a woman boss ever. I've been the woman boss a lot, but I've never had a female boss. I've worked with a lot of high-level females now in government, and now a lot of really high-level females in the aerospace industry. So everybody's come along on their path. There are a lot more women than there used to be, but I was never discriminated against. I think, as a matter of fact, I think I was well protected, and I was protected from perspective. They wanted to make sure my career kept moving forward. So they gave me really good advice, and I could introduce you to my bosses that did that for me. You'd love them all. But it's true, there were not a lot of women. And I just thought, wow, because there were more women in the computer industry than there were in the satellite industry, for sure. And that's changed, but still people, and now men, opt out equally as much because they decide they're going to make a different life choice. And there are still some parts of this business you have to travel a lot. And you have to, that's a personal decision. You have to make kind of those personal decisions along the way for yourself and your business. And and I didn't really think about it. It's not like I said, I'm never going to get married, I'm not going to have kids. I just wasn't at the time. Now I am. But I kept moving forward because that's what there was to do. And it was fabulous and exciting and, for me. So be very careful. It's a personal decision. And I'm telling the truth when I say I've never been discriminated against. And if I was, they did it so far behind my back, I never realized it. So.
Well, that's incredible to hear. We're approaching our close. So I just want to say thank you so much for your time and giving us all this really rich information about your career and what Global Marketing Insights does and how it positively affects, the government, companies that it works for, and everything in between. So thank you so much to Shawana, and you can take it away, Doug.
Thank you, Bradley, and thank you, Shawana, for taking the time today to talk about your career journey, your experience with supply chain and sustainability, as well as marketing. We greatly appreciate it when we have great speakers who are willing to talk to our students, faculty, staff, alumni, and community members about their journey.